Alright, so this video is to help anyone with operations with integers. Remember, an integer is just a positive or negative whole number. Things like -4, +4, -12, +12. But it does not include decimals and does not include fractions. So we're going to talk about operations with integers. Alright, so anytime doing operations with integers, your first step is you need to decide, is it going to be multiplying and dividing, or is it adding and subtracting? That's step one. Is it a multiplying or dividing question, or is it adding and subtracting question? We ask that because the rules for those two sections are the same, so we want to make sure we start by identifying which one is it. And you'll notice if it's multiplying or dividing, if it's a giveaway, if it's multiplying, if it's something touching a parentheses. Now, it's a giveaway if it's dividing, because you will see the division sign somewhere in the problem. So look carefully. If you see -3 divided by 3, or if you see -8 divided by 4, or if you just see 24 divided by -6. If you see 24 divided by -6, that means it's not 24 minus 6, it's saying 24 divided by. So your key is looking for that division sign. So make sure you know if it's multiplying or dividing. Now, as I was saying about multiplying, is if it's something touching a parentheses, like this is a 5 touching the parentheses, that means multiplying. Or if it has this little big dot right there in the middle of them, that means multiplying. So make sure you can tell for sure, is it a multiplying or dividing question. Also, as a side note, division is sometimes shown with a fraction bar, such as you could have, like the 24 divided by -6, we could have written 24 fraction bar -6. That fraction bar means kind of the same thing as dividing. 24 divided by -6. So keep that in mind. Alright, so that's how to tell if it's multiplying or dividing. Now, if you're not sure if it's adding or subtracting, let's double check. Let's look at the videos for adding and subtracting. If you see plus, or plus a negative, or just minus, or minus a negative, you'll notice, and this says etc. down there, you'll notice none of those did we have any of the things I just said. There was nothing touching a parentheses, there was no dots, there was no division sign, there was no fraction bars. So you look very carefully. I know it can get confusing because you have a parenthesis right here, or you have a parenthesis right here, and you think that means multiply, but really they're doing that just to confirm for you, to let you know that is a negative number in there. So if it's an adding or subtracting, make sure you do the set of steps for that. So once you've decided, step one for any operation with the integer question, once you've decided whether it's multiplying or dividing or adding or subtracting, we're now going to go through the steps for each of those. And we're going to start with multiplying and dividing, because multiplying and dividing are the easiest ones. Those are the ones that look the most like what we're used to doing with regular numbers. And then we'll talk about the adding and subtracting ones. So if you're multiplying or dividing, your steps are: step one, will the answer be positive or negative? That's the first thing I want you to think about. Now, that means if you have and just use the rules that you know, use the rules that we talked about, and then you practice. Will it be positive or negative? That's the first thing. So remember, a positive times a positive is a positive. A negative times a negative is a positive. So in other words, if the signs are the same, like two positives or two negatives, if the signs are the same, if you're multiplying or dividing, I just happen to write multiplication, if they're multiplying or dividing, the answer will always be positive if they're both the same sign. But now look at the next two. If the signs are different, like a positive times a negative, or a negative times a positive, or divided by, if the signs are different, the answer will be negative. That's the rule when multiplying or dividing. So remember that. Multiplying and dividing have the exact same rules, so we're going to do them at the same time. So step one, will the answer be positive or negative? Okay, so now step two. I want you to ignore the signs that you just decided on in step one. Ignore step one. In step two, you're going to multiply or divide like normal. Do what you would normally do, but ignore any negative signs. Just multiply or divide like you would normally do. That's step two. You don't need the negatives. You already know if the answer is going to be positive or negative, so do not even look at the negative signs. Now, step three, our final step. You're going to take the sign from step one, and you're going to take the value from step two, and you're going to put them together. So what you're going to do is, once you know what the sign is going to be, by using what you did talk about in step one, And then multiplying and dividing like normal in step 2, you're going to take the signs and the value and put them together. So if you know it was going to be negative, and then let's say you got 4 as your answer, you know it's going to be negative 4 as an example. And we're going to now do some examples of doing that. But for every single question, I want you to come back to this page or this slide, and I want to make sure you are going over this every single question for multiplying or dividing. First, know it's going to be positive or negative, then just multiply and divide like normal, and then step 3, put those together. Alright, so take a look at the examples on this screen, multiplying and dividing examples. Now, I'm going to help you with the first couple, but then I want you to do the others. We're going to kind of model it together. Now, we'll start with the top left. 20, now what does that mean when it's touching a parenthesis? It means times, it means multiply. So that means 20 times negative 6. So let's go through our steps. That was almost like step 1 right there. Remember, step 1 is it multiplying or dividing? And now we know that it's a multiplying problem because it's touching a parenthesis like this one is. We know it's multiplying. So that means we have to use our steps for multiplying or dividing. So let's look at those steps. Step 1, will the answer be positive or negative? So that's what we're going to look at first. Here, our first one is positive, our second one is negative. Okay, so that means we're multiplying a positive times a negative. So remember our list, positive times a negative, well that's going to be a negative. So we now know that this is going to be a negative answer. So that was step 1. We know it's going to be a negative answer, so now let's move on to step 2. Step 2 is, now ignore the fact that it's negative. We don't need that anymore. Step 2, ignore it. We're going to multiply or divide like normal. That's what we're going to do. That is step 2. And I want you to ask yourself these steps, okay? That is step 2. So now step 2, multiply or divide like normal. Now, do your long multiplication, however you need to do it. I know you like doing long multiplication, a lot of you, or however you need to do it. So 20 times 6. So 20 times 6, that's going to be 120. 120. Now, step 3. Step 3 was take the signs from step 1 and the value from step 2 and put them together. So we took the sign from step 1, we knew it would be negative. We took the value from step 2, we knew it was going to be 120, and we put them together. So the answer is negative 120. And again, off to the side, feel free to do your long multiplication of actually finding out what is 20 times 6. Notice no negative sign being mentioned. We don't need it. And then carry the 1, or that one comes out 120. So no mentioning of that. But then step 3, we take that negative and take the value 120, and now we put them together. We know our answer is negative 120. That's what you want to do if you need to stay super organized to make sure you're following the steps for multiplying or dividing with integers. Alright, so now we're going to do the example right over to the right. We're going to do the one right there. So in that one we have to decide, I don't know, step 1. Let's go all the way back. Step 1 was, is it multiplying or dividing, or is it adding and subtracting? That's step 1. So that's what we need to figure out. So now back to that problem. We see, okay, I see a division sign, and then parentheses, no parentheses, but it doesn't matter. The fact that there's a division sign, that's what tells us we know this is a division problem. So we're going to use the steps that we learned about multiplying and dividing. So I'll come back to this one. Step 1, multiplying and dividing. Will the answer be positive or negative? So let's look at ours. We have a negative number divided by, there's nothing in front of that one. That means it's positive. So we have a negative number divided by a positive number. So a negative and a positive, whether multiplying or dividing, that's going to give us a negative. Okay, so the signs are different. Whenever you multiply and divide, if the signs are different, we know it's going to be negative. So we know the answer to ours will be negative. So we can now know, we can just stop worrying about that. Now we're going to do the division like we normally would, because remember that was step 2. Step 2 says, now multiply or divide like normal. In this case, or this is dividing, so we're not going to worry about multiplying. So we're going to divide like normal. So in other words, 38 divided by 2. So that's a highlighter. 38 divided by 2. Feel free to do your long division, okay, and go through, and then go, and you know it goes into it evenly, so you have no remainder. I don't have room to do the 18 minus, so remainder of 0. Sorry, I can't really fit it down there. So in other words, 16. So what we're going to do is now step 3 says to take the sign from step 1, we knew it was going to be negative in this case, and take the value from step 2, and then put them together. That's what it tells us to do. So we took the sign from step 1. Step 1 told us it was going to be a negative because we looked at negative times a positive. We took the value from our normal long division and then we put them together. So our answer is negative 16. That is our final step. We know the answer to this problem is negative 16. So now, we've now done two examples together where I've modeled and I've shown you what it means to go back and check those steps of what you want to do when you're working through these problems. Is it going to be positive or negative? Okay, now we know that. Ignore the negatives. Now, how to multiply or divide, do that, and then put those two together. And this is, of course, all after the initial question of, is this multiplying or dividing, or is this adding and subtracting? It's all after that original question. So now I want you to try these last four examples, try them on your own, press pause, and then I'll reveal the answers to them. Alright, so now you see the answers to each of these, negative 12, 72, negative 7, positive 6. Now you'll notice, I wrote a little note down here, a negative times a negative, that's going to equal a positive. So that's how we knew in that bottom left one it was going to be positive 72. But I hope make sure you went through and referred back to your steps as you were going through these questions. Alright, so now we're going to talk about adding and subtracting steps. But remember, this is only after the original step one, you asking yourself, is this a multiplying and dividing question, or is this an adding and subtracting question? So if you realize it was an adding or subtracting question like it was in those, we're now going to follow the steps for adding and subtracting integers. That's what we're going to do. Alright, so let's talk about these steps first, and then we're going to do some examples using them. So if you know for sure it's an adding, subtracting with integers problem, here's what you're going to do. You're going to, for starters, let's not be shy. Let's rely on your number line. So before you do all this, you already have a number line drawn. And I'm going to show you my best number line I could possibly manage. Alright, so the adding, subtracting steps. Step one. Step one, as always, the first number in the question tells you where to start on the number line. You need to put a dot here, wherever that location may be. So, for example, if you had negative 5 plus 7, ignore the plus 7, we don't care. Step one we said was look at the first number. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at the first number. The first number is negative 5. So step one is put a dot at negative 5. So I'm going to do it right over it. That way I don't mess up my number line. Anyways, so put a dot right at negative 5. That's step one. Now, step two. Step two says, if you're adding, that means you're going to go to the right, meaning what comes after the first number. That's what you're looking at. So for us, what comes after our first number is plus. Okay, so it says plus, so we're going to go to the right. So if it's adding, that means go to the right. If it had been subtracting, that would mean go left. Okay, so that's step one. I'm sorry, that's step two. So we know from negative 5, we're going to go to the right. We're going to go in that direction. All right, so now let's look at step 3. Step 3 says the second number tells you how far to go from step 1, because remember, step 1 is where we're doing it. We're starting at from that dot in step 1. So from step 1, that's important. And as a side note, if the second number is negative, I got an arrow, do the opposite of what step 2 says. So we'll get to that when we need that. But for now, this question doesn't have our example. So we're going to focus on if the second number tells you how far to go from step 1. So in our example, we had plus 7. So that means from negative 5, we just found out plus, reminded, means go to the right. We're going to go 7 spaces. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that's where we end up. And you just have to figure out, what point is that? And on my number line, I numbered every 5 tick marks. I labeled every 5 tick marks. So that's going to be positive 2. That mark right there, that's where 2's at. So that means the answer to our question is positive 2. We know it's positive because it's on the right side of 0. It's not on the left side. If it had finished on the left side of 0, we would have had a negative answer. So we know without a doubt our answer is positive 2. So now let's take a look at a couple more of these. Okay, now if you had negative 4 minus 10. Now remember, step 1. Step 1 says the first number tells you where to start on the number line. Put a dot here. So that means we're going to go to negative 4 and we're going to put a dot there. So negative 4 is right there, right before negative 5 if you're coming from 0. Now, step 2 says, look at the operation. What is it telling you? This operation says minus. And step 2 reminded us that when you minus, you're going to the left. That's what minus means. So from here, step 2 tells us we're going to go left. Now, step 3 tells us how far to go. So from here, we know we're going left, and we're going, it looks like, 10 spaces. So from negative 4, go left 10 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we finish right here. So that location is your answer. And you'll notice that location, that is negative 14. So we know our answer is negative 14. And if to think about this, if you started in the negatives and we knew we had to go left, that means we're going deeper into the negatives. That's what that tells us. So that makes sense. Negative 14 is deeper than negative 4. Now, in our next example, if we had, let's say, 3 minus 9, step 1, put a dot where the first number is. So that's what we're going to do. Step 1, we're going to put a dot at positive 3, since it says positive 3. So that's step 1. Now, step 2 is decide, are we going left or are we going right? We see a minus sign, so that means we're going left. Now, step 3 says the second number tells us how far to go. We know we're going to the left. It's a 9, so we're going left 9 spaces. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Where we finish was right here. And that location is negative 6. Just like our last one, that location was negative 14. So negative 6. That tells us the answer to this question is negative 6. 3 minus 9 is negative 6. That's what you do for all of these. The first number tells you where to start, and everything after that, the minus or plus, tells you which way to go, and then the last final number tells you how far to go in the direction that you now know. So these are some examples of adding, subtracting with negatives. Now here's what I'm going to do. We're now going to talk about the special note. We're going to do some examples where I mentioned if the second number is negative, we got to do something different. We're going to do the opposite of step 2. Those are some examples we're going to do now. And then I'm going to leave you with some examples for you to try, and then you're going to hit pause, you're going to try them on your own number lines, and then you're going to hit play and see how you did. But first, let's do some examples like that. Alright, so look at this example at the top. We have negative 4 minus negative 3. Now this one could get kind of confusing because we have all of these what look like minus or negative signs. It can get kind of confusing. But here's what you do. Stick to the steps we talked about. Step 1, put a dot at where the first number says. Our first number is a negative 4. That means we're going to start by putting a dot at negative 4. That's step 1. Now, step 2 was minus. It told us minus means go left. But we did talk about this exception. Something's going to happen in step 3 if it was opposite, if it's the second number is a negative. So we want to go left because of this minus sign. We want to go left. We want to go that way. But step 3 had a special rule in it. Step 3 says sometimes if the second number is negative, you're going to do the opposite of step 2. So that's what we're going to do. So unfortunately, we don't get to go left like we wanted to here. We're going to have to go right. So instead of going left, we're going to go right 3 spaces. It's still going to be 3 spaces. That number still determines it, but that we're going to the right. So 1, 2, 3. So we're going to be right here, and that is negative 1. So it tells us the answer to this question is negative 1. Now, there is no straight rule of a negative minus a negative is a negative. There's no rule like that because there's no set rule because it is determined by how big is this number. Because let's see, if this number had been like 8 or 9, we would have gone further, and if we'd gone further, we would have ended up in the positives. But since that number was smaller, we didn't go as far, so we didn't make it to the positives. We only went 3 spaces, and we were still in the negatives. So don't try to make a straight rule like that for adding and subtracting. It's not there. So notice, in this problem, we wanted to go left because of that minus sign, but we couldn't because the second number was negative, and negative, think of it as like he's a bad boy. He doesn't do what he's told. So we want to go left and subtract, but since he's negative, he doesn't do what he's told. He does the opposite. So instead of going left, we went to the right. Alright, so in this second example I have in blue, we have 16 plus negative 23. Now, you remember what we talked about. The original step one was we know that this is an adding question because there's a plus sign here. Even though we see a parenthesis here and we like to think touching parentheses means multiplying, we're not touching the parenthesis. There's an addition sign in between us and the parenthesis. And just because you see a minus here, a negative here, or a minus sign doesn't mean we're necessarily subtracting. In this case we will be, but we'll get to that. So anyways, let's follow our steps. Step 1, look at the first number. Put a dot at the first number. That's step 1. So the first number is a 16, so we're going to put a dot at positive 16. Now, step 2 was to look at the operation. It says adding. We want to add. Add means from step 2, means adding, means go to the right, but we're going to do that. So let's see, we want to go to the right, but now step 3 reminded us, remember, use your steps. Step 3 says if the second number is negative, you're going to do the opposite of step 2. So instead of going to the right, no, not going to the right, we're going to go in the other direction. So that means we're going to have to go to the left. So it says 23 spaces. So it means we're going to go to the left 23 spaces. Count these carefully. And remember, you don't count where you start. You do not count where you start. You count where you first traveled. So that's 1. That's 2. That's 3. You would not say that was 4. You don't start counting where you start. You start counting once you've gone a space. All right, so if you've gone 3, you got to go 23, 24, 25. Oh, I'm counting wrong. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That would make this 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. Okay, so we just have to figure out what number is that. So it's going to be right here, and that's -5, so that's going to be -7. So that means the answer to our question is -7. So 16 plus -23 equals -7. And now we went through our steps when we did that, and we put our dot where we started, and then we had to figure out which direction we're going in and how far are we going in that direction. Alright, so now I'm going to do one more example where I'm really going to walk you through it, and then I'm going to give you some examples of adding, subtracting for you to try. And then you'll hit pause and you'll try them and see how you did. So we're going to do one more example together, and then you're going to try a few on your own. So take a look at this last example we're going to do together. Now, we see 5 minus -11. We know it's a minus problem because we have a minus sign before the parenthesis. It's not touching the parenthesis, so it's not a multiplication problem. Alright, so step 1 was, let's look at our steps. Step 1 was put a dot where the first number tells you to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a dot at +5. So I got a dot at +5. Step 2 was look to see is it adding or subtracting, because that'll tell you which way to go. This says subtracting. So that means we want to go to the left. Now, step 3 says the second number tells you how far to go. Oh, and don't forget, if the second number is negative, you're going to do the opposite of step 2. And in our case, our second number is negative. It's -11. So that means we're going to have to do the opposite. We don't get to go left, we're going to have to go to the right, because we want to go left, but that second number being negative, remember, he's a bad boy. He doesn't do what he's told. He does the opposite. So the opposite of minusing, or the opposite of going to the left, is going to be going to the right. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go to the right, and we're going to do it 11 spaces. So from 5, go to the right 11 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So we're going to be right here. That location is +16. So +16, that's the answer to our question. 5 minus -11, that is +16. So now we've done a few examples together. I've really walked you through them, reminding you of adding and subtracting. We did some examples on this side, knowing which way to go, and some examples on this one if the second number is negative. Now it's going to be time for you to, I'm just going to write a few questions. You're going to do them on your own, and then you're going to hit play and see how you did. Okay, so on this screen, I went ahead and just made up a bunch of adding and subtracting problems with some negatives, 2 negatives, 1 negative, things like that. I want you to take your time and go through these, but remember, go through the steps that we just did. So press pause, start trying these, and then I'll start slowly revealing the answers for you. Hit pause. And like I said, I'm just going to slowly reveal these, so don't be shy to hit pause and try some of them, or think you made a mistake, and go back and try them as you go. That's perfectly fine. Alright, so you've now had time to try each of these and check your answers on them, and so you've now gotten quite a bit more practice, and I hope you went through these and you're going through the steps that I did. It was the ones we did together. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, and take your time. So now you've got some practice problems in you, so now let's do a final summary and we're going to be all done. Alright, so our final summary is, when doing operations with integers, we were talking about operations with integers. I'm going to abbreviate integers. Okay, step 1 was first, you got to decide what operation it is and look very carefully. And remember, we talked about some of the examples of those, of whether it was multiplying and dividing or if it was adding and subtracting. You got to know which one it is because they are different types of questions. Okay, step 2. These are the overall steps. Step 2. Now follow the steps for that operation. So if it was multiplying and dividing, follow the steps we talked about right here in multiplying and dividing. If it was adding and subtracting, follow the steps that we have here for adding and subtracting. Now, went too far. Now, step 3, finally, after the overall big idea, is double check and make sure that you did all the steps. And if you know you did all the steps for that type of problem, be confident because you did it. Those steps are what you want to go through and remind yourself for doing operations with integers. Be confident knowing that if you use these steps and you remember to remind yourself, think of it as a checklist, have them right next to you if you need to, and for each problem, be confident knowing you did your steps. And if you still have the correct, if you had the correct answer, awesome, you're doing great. But if you had a mistake, maybe see in one of those steps, you must have made a mistake somewhere, but now go find it. So practice, take your time, and remember, draw a quality number line for yourself to where it's clearly labeled and it's very even and neat that you can now use for each of your questions. Take your time, practice, use the steps, and after a while you'll start to wean yourself off the steps. Maybe you won't need to see them next to you. Maybe mentally you'll already be going through those in your mind. That's the idea behind this. Practice, and good luck, guys.